Hello, hello. And I don't know if anybody's listening out there, but if you are, thanks for listening. And I hope you're well. I hope you're doing well. And this is episode 34. And picking up where I left off a little bit over a week ago, I admit. And we were looking at giving, the idea of giving in Buddhism. And today we're going to be looking at a couple of other ideas in relationship to right view, because we're still in chapter 3. And in case you're interested, and I hope you are, I'm reading On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon. And this is written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, who's a well-known American Buddhist monk. And he's widely respected for his translations of the early Buddhist texts and his teachings on the Dhamma. Yeah, the Dhamma, ladies and gentlemen. So I just woke up not too long ago. I'm a little bit, a little bit out of it. But I thought, gosh, this is a great way to start the day. And I thought, I'm gonna record this episode, and then I'm gonna read. If anybody is out there and also reads my Substack, then I'm undertaking the Master Key system right now as a little experiment in critique. But also, I'm really trying to keep my mind open. Do it with do it with an open heart, open mind. After I lay this down, I'm going to go do my practice, do my meditation. And I think it's kind of cool, given that today I'm starting on a new section in the book. And so if you are following along in the book, on page 175, we're getting into virtue and what right view has to say about the idea of virtue. And this comes from Sutta 81. There are 5 gifts, 5 great gifts: original, long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated. Unadulterated from the beginning, are not open to suspicion, will never be open to suspicion, and are unfaulted by knowledgeable contemplatives and Brahmins. Which 5? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones, abandoning the taking of life, abstains from taking life. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. In giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. And then there is an ellipses, and it says, quote, abandoning taking what is not given, and then in brackets, stealing, he abstains from taking what is not given. Ellipses. Quote, abandoning sexual misconduct, he abstains from sexual misconduct. Ellipses. Abandoning lying, he abstains from lying. So, have to assume here, right, that the idea is that it's another stanza in support of all of the rights. He's kind of going down the line here of, and these should sound familiar. I find, and I think you'll find that a lot of Buddhists, and I'm not a scholar, as I'm always very quick to say, I'm not ordained. I never took ordination. I've never been a monk. I've never been a scholar. I've never been particularly interested in being a scholar, really, in relationship to Buddhism. Not that I'm judging scholars by any measure. But yeah, I think I've had teachers. I've had plenty of teachers. And there is a general understanding, that Buddhism is very, very universal. In other words, if you're a Christian, you can also be a Buddhist. Although I don't know how that would work out for you. That would probably be some serious mental gymnastics. But in Buddhism, there's no presupposition that you need to believe anything. It's all about doing it and seeing it for yourself. And having said all that, though, this probably sounds pretty familiar, right? If you are a religious being, this might, or if you're a Stoic, if you're a, this kind of aligns with the Golden Rule or aligns with the Ten Commandments. There's a lot of crossover here. And I'm not a scholar. I'm not even going to pretend to know. And and then of course I'm also, I'm a white Westerner, so I'm not even going to begin to pretend to know what any tradition around the world has to say about ethics or behavior. But in Buddhism, there's a strong ethical backbone, spine. It's the spine of Buddhism, I would argue. And I'm not arguing it. I mean, I'm just coming from what I know of the ancient teachings, and again, I'm not a scholar, moral framework. And so this is, I'm assuming the ellipses is just saying, I could repeat this whole section, but I think you get the idea that in not participating in any of these, the practitioner gains a share themselves. I have to admit, I'm not really a big fan of the way that he chose to teach this. I realize that this is again, everything is contextual, right? But this is always a problem that I've had with ethics and ethical behavior. And the idea of ethical behavior is that if one is practicing an ethical behavior because one was told they should, well, that's kind of, this is where I wish I was more of a scholar, because here's my understanding of Buddha. My understanding is that, he was a rich dude, a rich young man, a rich, young dude, married, kids, rich, Brahmin class, warrior class, I think. I don't remember. Observed behavior and kind of went, what? And then, this can't be right. This can't be all there is. And then went off and experienced incredible, Machiavellian bliss, and also, became an arahat and starved himself and pushed his mental capacity and physical capacities to the limits. And would always say, from what we know, because it was an oral tradition, but from the most close to the original teachings as we know, suggests that he always said, you have to see this for yourself. And I recognize that all religions, and yes, Buddhism is a religion, kind of needs to frame these ideas this way, but it kind of just turns my stomach, to be honest. Well, you do it so that you can have some of it. That just kind of grosses me out. And it makes me wonder, the other day I was watching something, and I can't remember exactly what elicited the comment that I made, but it's really genuinely how I feel, and I've written about this in my Substack. I have a problem with engaged Buddhism. I don't have a problem with the reasons why Thich Nhat Hanh kind of, I would argue, changed Buddhism a little bit. I reckon I would do that too, or the inclination makes a lot of sense, that you go through that kind of war, you see that much horror, and you just don't want people to suffer, That's certainly where my passion comes from. I really saw a lot of physical and sexual abuse as a little kid. I kind of got to see the worst of humanity. Just how dark we can be, We can be really dark. And I realize that some religions really discourage us from acknowledging or even spending any time looking at that. But that's not what we do in Buddhism. We don't reject. There's no rejecting. It's not dualistic. There's no this or that. There has to be rejection in a dualistic system. It's inherent in the system. Anytime you create an us, you fundamentally create a them. By proxy. I just wrote about this. Anyway, I'm going way off the train. Just to say, can't you do this shit because you want people to be happy and to be free from suffering? Right? Why can't you just teach it that way? I guess I get it. Religions are always teaching people like that. Well, you do it so that you won't have to, so that when it's your turn, you won't. Well, that's a fucked up way to fucking teach it, man. It's like you're playing on people's self-centered narcissism by teaching it that way. I mean, yeah, that's a great point. You're right. I could be nice to people so that people will be nice to me. Or I could fucking meditate every day and open up my heart. And when you do that, what starts to happen is you really start to feel. And when you really start to feel, then you don't lie and steal and kill because you genuinely love your brothers and your sisters and you really don't want to do harm. Not because you're trying to get out of experiencing something. Moving on. I say don't do these things, and I say meditate every day and cultivate compassion so that you're not doing these things not because you're trying to get out of experiencing harm, and so you're, being a good little boy or a good little girl to other people so that people will be nice to you, which, quite frankly, is more manipulative than it is genuine. Rather than that, I would say, how about cultivate compassion so that you genuinely actually don't want to kill someone or steal from them or lie to them or make their life miserable. That's kind of what I would recommend. How about that? Moving on. Abandoning the use of intoxicants, he abstains from taking intoxicants. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings. In giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. This is the fifth gift, the fifth great gift, original, long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated from the beginning, that is not open to suspicion, will never be open to suspicion, and is unfaulted by knowledgeable contemplatives and Brahmins. And that comes from AN 8:39. And I think that Buddha clears it up for me right here in the last sentence. And I think I kind of just forgot, because this is also what he said at the beginning. See how quickly we can forget? At least when you're in my brain. I have to suppose, I don't have to do anything. I am choosing to suppose that when he says things like original, long-standing, traditional, ancient, that language is very inclusive. And I think that what that says to me is that Buddha said that most people were not going to follow this path because most people didn't have the urgency that was required. And I've mentioned in other episodes, I can't believe this is episode 34, that what brought me to Buddhism, and also to help in general, like therapy, 12 steps in my case for bulimia, and then, later another program to help me with how I grew up and just kind of, healing a lot of things, is my own urgency. My own in other words, if urgency doesn't sound familiar to you, how about the word desperation? Hitting a bottom. And so, yeah, I get it. Yeah, if one doesn't feel if one doesn't genuinely feel that compassion, then yeah, I could see how you would want to find mechanisms to help you do the things that would prevent you from all of this. And I'm the first to admit that, that because I'm not, like, for instance, let's take it back here. I don't 100% abstain from intoxicants. When I'm on an intoxicant, yeah, it changes my behavior. Right? So we'll just kind of look at this last one. before that, he's including them all here. But then after this kind of series of ellipses and beginning stanzas on stealing, sexual misconduct, and lying, he once again returns to the full stanza for intoxicants, right? So alcohol, drugs, all of these things. And he says, hey, we don't use them. And I am not a monastic, and I struggled with addiction my entire life. I can tell you firsthand that intoxicants, and in my case, food was an intoxicant because of how I abused it, how I abused food. And I would say addiction in general, for me, lots of things can become intoxicants because of how I use them. And it becomes a really big part of my practice. And even now, I have something that I really want to let go of, and I'm struggling. And I know that it's not in alignment with my Buddhist practice. And I'm doing the best that I can, also knowing that if I let this go, I would be much more likely to be free from danger, animosity, oppression, and all the things. This is why it's even more important that I bring in my practice, because I don't want to cause harm. We're in right view right now, but down the road we'll get into right speech. And I think we all know that drinking too much, or drugging too much, or porning too much, or cell phoning too much, and this is more subtle, and you may not realize this, but I'm studying this, and I can tell you that if you're doom scrolling, it's changing your behavior, and not for the better. Okay, so all of that can become intoxicants, and I get it, he's right, too, that I have seen how this thing that I do that is helping me right now, and because it's helping me, it's making it hard to let it go. I also see how a negative aspect of it is that I have less patience for unconsciousness. And that's not compassionate. So this can be very overt. All of these things here: war, genocide, slavery, matricide, sex trafficking, rape, murder, horror, suffering. When you experience these things yourself firsthand, it develops urgency. But if you haven't, you may not have that touchstone. And I have to assume that that is why he taught these this way in relationship to virtue. So yeah, right on, moving on. All right, top of page 176, Sutta 82. There are these 5 benefits in being virtuous, in being consummate in virtue. Which 5? There's the case where a virtuous person, consummate in virtue, through not being heedless in his affairs, amasses a great quantity of wealth. His fine reputation is spread far and wide. When approaching an assembly of nobles, Brahmins, householders, or contemplatives, he does so confidently and without embarrassment. He dies without becoming delirious. With the breakup of the body after death, he reappears in a good destination, a heavenly world. These are the 5 benefits in being virtuous, in being consummate in virtue. And that comes from DN 16. Okay, so I actually had to use a little bit of AI trained by Buddhist monks to help me with this. And I find it ironic because this sutta, when I read it, I had had a visceral reaction to it, a straight up just like, what? And ironically, it's because it's the same effing problem that I have with the Master Key System and Charles Haanel, which I'm also doing right now, and I'm meditating, beginning his part 3, right after I lay this down. But it's clearly I find it interesting. It's clearly what's in my own ma Ma, is that right? My own, it's the bone this dog's got going right now, my relationship to money. Because what I saw when I read this was, wait, is he saying that accumulating wealth is how we're born into, a better destination? And if you're following on the podcast, I'm secular, and that, I have much respect for Buddhism as outlined by Buddha, and I have experience with psychedelics as a lot of psychedelics as a young person. Don't do them now, but I'm just saying I've had some wild experiences, and so I'm trying to keep my mind. I have a very open mind to the idea of not reincarnation. That's not what Buddha. That's a very different thing than what the Buddha taught. But yeah, I'm very open to the idea of karma, and rebirth. But at any rate, so I had to consult AI. Like, is that what's being said here? And not just any AI. As I mentioned, I used Norbu. I wrote about it in my Substack. You can look at that. Thank you, Nathan, from the Meditation Mind Discord server, who turned me onto it. And it really helped me a lot to, kind of tease this out and explain to me kind of what I guess I kind of already mentioned earlier, which is that, Buddha was teaching to householders like myself, and to kings too, and to great leaders, and so, or Brahmins, and, which, was kind of the same thing back in his time. And so, he really teased it out that it's not, wealth in this regard is not about attaining things, money, stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with attaining things, money, and stuff, but it's much more about, in Buddhism, intention. Again, this is under the subheading of virtue. So, what you're doing with your money, how the intention in which you're spending your money, the intention with which you're living in the world and in and among your community, can create the benefits of this kind of wealth. This is virtue. So that really helped me. I kind of needed to tease that out because, there's a lot going on there. But at any rate, thank you, Norbu. And if you'd like, here, you know what? Let me share it with you. So we had a little conversation. I won't bore you with the whole going back and forth. I'll just give you Norbu's final kind of response to me. So, Norbu says, I see the source of the concern. This passage from DN 16, Mahaparinibbana Sutta, isn't actually saying that wealth leads to higher birth. Instead, it's listing different benefits that come from being virtuous. Sila. And so then Robot breaks it down. Number 1, the primary focus here is on virtue, not wealth. 2, wealth is mentioned as one possible outcome of being diligent and virtuous. 3, the heavenly rebirth mentioned comes from virtue itself, not from wealth. And then Robot says, think of it this way. Virtue might lead to wealth through honest work and diligence, but it's the virtue itself that leads to a favorable rebirth, not the wealth. This is consistent with the Buddhist teachings throughout the canon, where he often warns about the dangers of attachment to wealth. The key message is about the importance of virtue, with wealth being just one of several possible worldly benefits, not the cause of higher rebirth. So, very interesting stuff there. All right, I'm going to move on. 83, Sutta 83. And further, with reference to the virtues that are untorn, unbroken, unspotted, unsplattered, ooh, I love it, liberating, praised by the observant, ungrasped at, leading to concentration, the monk dwells with his virtue in tune with that of his companions in the holy life, to their faces and behind their backs. This, too, is a condition that is conducive to amiability, that engenders feelings of endearment, engenders feelings of respect, leading to a sense of fellowship, a lack of disputes, harmony, and a state of unity. And that comes from AN 6:1. 12. Wow. I find this to be a really important sutta right here. I wish that this particular sutta was just almost introduced at the beginning of every single Sangha sit everywhere in the United States. I know the Buddhists spent a lot of time talking about how important it was to, Sangha is one of the three jewels, along with the Eightfold Path, the supplemental practices, or the supplemental keys, aspects of Buddhism are, the Eightfold Path, and then those supplemental factors that, we talked about way back in chapter 1, I believe, another voice and an admirable friendship in the holy life. That really struck me today. Discernment is really, really important in Buddhism. So what's really jumping out at me here, and this is actually the last sutta before we get to the next subheading of heaven. What is heaven in Buddhism? The monk. So first of all, he's talking about monks. I'm not a monk. I'm a layperson. But what I do when I'm reading this is, I really do take it to heart and try to apply it to my own life. And, how can I better live this out, or how can I contemplate this and think about this as a householder? So the monk dwells with his virtue in tune with that of his companions in the holy life, to their faces and behind their backs. One flaw that I have, that I've noticed about myself, I guess in 12-step programs, they would call them character defects. Not a big fan of that, but is that I've done this. I've participated in this. And when I have, I know it's time to go. So what am I talking about? The people that they're spending their time with is their Sangha. They gave up their householder lifestyle. They took refuge in the three jewels. They renounced. They're practicing renunciation. They renounced marriage. They renounced children, having them. They renounced getting a job, going to the office, working with bosses and colleagues and clients, going to the store, interacting with other humans that are shopping, people who are serving. They renounced all of that. And he is addressing them in Sutta 84. But as a householder, what that means for me is that I interact with a lot more people. But these people are not all in my holy life. I mean, they're just people. They're just people peopling. They're people being themselves. I would never go so far as to say that I believe that people are just doing the best they can. I don't believe that that's true. I think people are doing what's easiest. And I think that that's human nature. And in a way, Buddhism kind of speaks to that too. Just kind of how we are. How we are. But I have noticed since I've left my job, there was so much not goodwill in the place that I worked. There was lots of gossip, lots of people talking about each other behind each other's backs. And then soon I found that I would catch myself participating, and I was doing it, and I was participating, and I was feeling worse and worse and worse, and I couldn't figure out how to separate myself from all of it. So I left. Discernment. So here's where, to my mind, I wish I perhaps could have been a sharper or less conditioned human, right? That I could have stood firm to my commitment to this practice. But I chose not to. But when we participate, right? When we participate in this, It's not conducive to amiability. It does not engender feelings of endearment with the people that are in your life. It does not engender feelings of respect. It engenders feelings of disrespect. And it does not lead to a sense of fellowship. It leads to a lack of disputes. Or I should say, it leads to disputes. It leads to disharmony, right? The opposite of everything that's being said here. So we really haven't gotten into right speech yet, but this to me just savors of right speech. Also, just in the practice and in discernment in terms of who is in my heaven, because now we're going to be moving into heaven, which is the next subsection. I have a role to play in that. We don't always have a role to play, but I feel very privileged that I do have a role to play in the sense that, I have more choices available to me. As when I apply this idea, again, if I was to apply the same sutta, and I think about the stories that I've read and the people that I've read about who have been in horrible situations and yet who never engaged in any of this. And I admire it so much. I just have incredible respect and admiration for it. It's amazing. Yeah. But yeah, I find it really interesting that this is here under virtue. But no, that does make a lot of sense, I guess, that it's under virtue. But yeah, so much of this is about right speech, at least for me it is, about how are we interacting with people? What am I bringing? I just left a community recently because all I was bringing was disharmony. I was not contributing in a positive way. It was just not a good fit, and I didn't have respect, for one of the people because of unconscious behavior that I observed. But that's so what? That's not my job, right? And so I was creating problems. And for me in my practice, because I'm not awake, obviously, is at that point I have to kind of, I meditate every day, and I kind of have to decide, okay, can you stay? Is this a place where you can stay and just be quiet? Or what do you think is more in alignment with your practice? Staying and being quiet? Staying and speaking up? Or leaving? And by the end, it was leaving. It was leaving because it's not my job, number one, to quote unquote fix if something isn't working out for me, and I'm not getting my needs met. As I mentioned, I'm in another program that I won't mention, but one of the things that we talk about in that program is, look, stop going to the hardware store for milk, and then getting angry at the hardware store for not having it. Well, why, and that's what I was doing. So this sutta here, AN 6:12 is really kicking up a lot of stuff for me in a good way about my own absolute worst character defects, about how kind of bitchy I can get because I stay in a bad fit, And one thing I'm learning, and I need to continue to learn, is that you can stay in a bad fit, but just be quiet. Just don't engage. Just don't engage. And that's very Buddhist too. And that's always been a real challenge for me as a real hot-blooded person who has, early trauma conditioning. And so, there's some really old patterning there, that's deep. And so I get to practice. All right, going to move over to a new subheading. Heaven, Sutta 84. It's from having known it myself, seen it myself, realized it myself, that I tell you that I have seen beings who, endowed with bodily good conduct, verbal good conduct, and mental good conduct, who did not revile noble ones, who held right views, and undertook actions under the influence of right views, at the breakup of the body after death, have reappeared in a good destination, a heavenly world. And this comes from ITI 71. And again, I am largely ignorant. I'm not sure what ITI 71 is. Sometimes I see these suttas and I know where they come from, but I'll have to look that one up. Really interesting here. And I'm going to guess here that we're now getting into responses to Hinduism and the Vedas, because that was what the Buddha came up on. You know, he grew up in India, and the culture of his time was, stemming from the Vedas and Hinduism, and which, operates from a caste system and the idea. And again, I'm very ignorant of Hinduism, but I do know enough to know that in Hinduism, it is believed that to be born into a higher realm, wealth and all of that, it's kind of based on class, to a certain degree. And I think that Buddhism, Gautama Siddhartha, who grew up, right, in a high caste, he was of high birth and was fed that line, right, by his father and by his family, and the people in his fabricated conditioning believed that he was of high birth. I almost wonder if Sutta 84 here is almost like we're now getting into a response. It's almost like it's his response. And we're getting into major cosmology here where, as I've mentioned before, I don't, quote unquote, believe in or disbelieve in. I reserve the right to not know. As I've mentioned before, I've had experiences on hallucinogens, which are becoming legal now in many states, and I'm really glad to hear it. And I've also had some experiences in a long retreat that I can't explain. And I've had other things happen as a child, a lot of things actually that happened as a child that I can't explain, that make it so that now I just go, I don't know. Yeah, maybe it was just my brain misfiring, or maybe the Buddha was right. I don't know. And why do I need to know? Why is it so fucking important to fucking know everything? Why do we always need to know everything, to cognate everything? There's so much happening in the body that we just ignore. Stop worrying so much about what you do and don't, quote unquote, know. So I'm wondering, though, if that's what this is a response to. He's saying, look, I've seen it for myself. Unlike what those what the Vedas are telling us over there, you don't have to be rich to go to heaven. You don't have to be powerful to go to heaven. You can be poor and be a villager or a proletariat, and you can go to heaven. Sutta 85. I have seen a heaven named 6 spheres of contact. Whatever form one sees there with the eye is desirable, never undesirable, pleasing, never displeasing, agreeable, never disagreeable. Whatever sound one hears there with the ear, whatever aroma one smells there with the nose, whatever flavor one tastes there with the tongue, whatever tactile sensation one touches there with the body, whatever idea one cognizes there with the intellect, is desirable, never undesirable, pleasing, never displeasing, agreeable, never disagreeable. And this comes from SN 35:135. And so again, I had an idea about what this meant, but I wanted to verify it through Norbu. And I think that's, yes, what he's saying here is what I thought he was saying. Okay. If anybody out there is reading this, maybe you already know way more about Hinduism than I do, in which case, tune this out. It'll probably just annoy you. Meditation is critical. You have the experience of Kundalini. You have the experience of jhanas, the jhanic system, and moving through the jhanas kind of moving through the Kundalini system up the body. And that in meditation, you can, and again, this is so way outside of my, scholars have been debating this forever, right? About who has access to higher jhanic states. Hindus would say that you have to be born into it. To even have access to those states, you need to be of higher birth. Buddha says, and to be of higher birth, you need to be of higher caste. Buddha says, no, you don't need to be of higher caste. I've seen for myself that you can have this experience, right? So I have certainly seen through psychedelics and also through meditation what he's describing. The degree to which he's describing it, I've only experienced through psychedelics. I've certainly never had access to all of my senses through meditation. I mean, that's like, wow. Psychedelics, yes, I have. And all of it, the whole sense experience, the full range. And yeah, I mean, there really aren't any words for it. And I would agree with everything here. I would also say, look, when I was a young woman, because I'm a Gen Xer, and so to say that you dropped acid, took ecstasy, and did mushrooms when you were young, if you're a Gen Xer and you say you're also punk rock, is not a thing. It's not a big deal. That's what you did when you were punk rock back in the 80s and 90s, is that you took a lot of things like that. Same thing happened in the 60s, and it's like they've all been around, and I'm really happy now that is it DMT, right? Or that we're now looking at well, we've been looking at hallucinogens from a therapeutic perspective for a really long time, and they're starting to get more and more kind of traction because science is supporting them more and more and more. Some religions, believe that these insights are dangerous, and potentially demonic. Suggest that kind of getting access to any of this is not what we should be pursuing. I don't know enough about Christianity to know if that's actually what Christ said, or if he even talked about any of that. At any rate, yeah, all of this stuff is there and available. When I typed this into Norbu just to make sure, yes, and this is the difference, I would say, from what I understand between Hinduism and Buddhism, maybe, is that it's not the goal. The goal in Buddhism is not to reach these states. And, when I sit in meditation every day, I am not looking to reach these states. And you could, I coach. I'm an embodiment coach. And I just worked with a client the other day about how far you can take some of these ideas. And I don't really... It was the first time I'd ever done this with this person, and it's not something I would really probably do on the regular because it doesn't really jive with quite frankly, my religion, if you want to call it a religion. What I've chosen to pursue philosophically, I think it's a dangerous game. And if you want to know why it's a dangerous game, read what Buddha wrote about it, because we become attached to it. It's a state. It's a state that we have access to. It's a state that we can produce. So at any rate, and it's also why, the Buddha probably would not have thought that, dropping acid and taking shrooms, intoxicants would have been the right way to go about it either. Because again, you're chasing after something. In fact, when it comes to heroin, they actually call it chasing the dragon. What's the dragon? Bliss. Bliss is the dragon. But bliss, this thing here, that he's describing in SN 35:135, watch out. You'll get attached to it. Why? What's the point? You live in the real world with real humans. Whoop-de-fucking-do. So you can climb the jhanic ladder. So what? How are you with other humans? And by the way, how you are with other humans, I would argue, I think that we've kind of screwed up Buddhism a little bit. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going around bowing and, there's discernment here. There's discernment, right? So at any rate, I'm going to move on. But yeah, there you go. Heaven. Watch out. Oh, good. Look at that. I noticed that the next subheading, which we're going to get to after this sutta here, is the drawbacks. You're damn right there's drawbacks to heaven. So I'm glad that that's following it up. Sutta 86. Monks. If one speaking rightly were to say of anything, It's utterly desirable, utterly charming, utterly appealing. One speaking rightly would say that just of heaven. It's utterly desirable, utterly charming, utterly appealing. So much so that it's not easy to make a comparison for how pleasant heaven is. When this was said, a certain monk said to the Blessed One, "But Lord, is it possible to make a comparison?" "It is," the Blessed One said. "Monks, suppose that a universal emperor were endowed with the 7 treasures and 4 powers, and because of that would experience pleasure and joy." And in brackets it says, here the Buddha gives a detailed description of these treasures and powers, which briefly stated are these. The 7 treasures consist of the wheel treasure, which magically and peacefully establishes the emperor's rule over all 4 directions, the elephant treasure, and the horse treasure, either of which, leaving the palace at dawn, can take him to the ocean and back before his morning meal, the jewel treasure that can turn night into day, the woman treasure, his queen, who is lovely and faithful to him, the steward treasure, who provides him with all the gold and bullion he needs, and the counselor treasure, who teaches him what is right and wrong, and rules wisely in his head. The 4 powers are the power of a supremely attractive appearance, a supremely long life, supremely good health, and supreme popularity among his subjects. Then then that's unbracket, and so that's what Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu was kind of quickly giving us a little backstory on what these 7 treasures are. Then the Blessed One, taking a small stone the size of his hand, said to the monks, "What do you think, monks? Which is greater, this small stone I have taken, the size of my hand, or the Himalayas, the king of the mountains?" "It's next to nothing, Lord, the small stone you have taken. It doesn't count. It's not even a small fraction. There's no comparison." In the same way, monks, the pleasure and joy experienced by a universal emperor because of his 7 treasures and 4 powers doesn't count next to the pleasures of the heavenly world. It's not even a small fraction. There's no comparison. MN 129. Really interesting, because, so he's, I was kind of relying on Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu's kind of quick outlining of the 7 treasures, and admittedly was too lazy to go back and I didn't really want to go in and look at all of that. It would have just taken forever. So I just kind of used AI to help me here. And the sense that I'm getting is that the Buddha is saying that there's really no amount of material wealth, power, prestige. There's no amount that can compare to freedom from suffering, liberation, dropping below thought, dropping all of that. I, me, mine. There's no comparison. And that the 7 treasures kind of were designed as a teaching mechanism to appeal to students who held Brahmins in really high regard. The way that today people hold celebrity, or Instagram influencers in really high regard. And so he was trying to find a touchstone to say, look, even that. So to put it in today's context, even a beautiful, famous millionaire Instagram influencer who can drop on private jets and travel the world and, take on lovers, whoever she wants, and eat at the finest dining, and the finest shows, and that even all of that can't compare to what freedom feels like. So unlike the Buddha, I did not come to this practice from wealth. I did not leave great wealth behind to break my own mind. I came from, depending on who I was living with at the time, either abject poverty or just, kind of mundane middle classery. So I can't really speak to this. I don't know how the other half lived, but the Buddha did. So the Buddha would know. Yeah, so really interesting. I'm really one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is because it's really teaching me too, because these suttas, they're old, and they're not written in English originally. These are, and this was an oral tradition, and so the best I could do, just like I would imagine people do with the Torah or the Quran, or the Holy Bible, or the the Bible in general, the language. There's so many barriers to understanding, and now we have scholars, and we have practitioners, and now we have robots. You may or may not like that, but yeah, so it really helps me. Because then I go and I look up, I'm like, wait, what exactly is he saying here? And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, okay. And again, I'll have to take his word for that. If Buddha's right and we do experience rebirth, and then maybe I will, maybe I was, or maybe I will be born into wealth one day, and maybe I will have this experience and be able to draw a comparison. But I can't draw a comparison. Yeah. But I'm sure that Siddhartha Gautama, I'm sure, is not the only human on the planet who probably feels this way, who actually has access to both fabricated states. So yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right, so we're now moving into another subheading. Drawbacks. Bottom of page 177. Sutta 87. When a diva is about to pass away from the company of divas, 5 omens appear. His garlands wither. His clothes get soiled. Sweat comes out of his armpits. A dullness descends on his body. He no longer delights in his own deva seat. The devas, knowing from this that this deva son is about to pass away, encourage him with 3 sayings. Go from here, honorable sir, to a good destination. Having gone to a good destination, gain the gain that is good to gain. Having gained the gain that is good to gain, become well established. When this was said, a certain monk said to the Blessed One, quote, "What, Lord, is the diva's reckoning of going to a good destination? What is their reckoning of the gain that is good to gain? What is their reckoning of becoming well established? The human state, monks, is the deva's reckoning of going to a good destination." Did you hear that? Just in case you missed it, let me read it again for you. The human state, monks, is the deva's reckoning of going to a good destination. Hear that. Having become a human being, acquiring conviction in the Dhamma, in Vinaya, taught by the Tathagata, this is the deva's reckoning of the gain that is good to gain. When that conviction is settled within one, rooted, established, and strong, not to be destroyed by any contemplative or Brahmin, Deva, Mara, or Brahma, or anyone else in the world, this is the Deva's reckoning of becoming well established. When a Deva passes away from the company of Devas, throughout his lifespan's ending, 3 sounds sound forth the Deva's encouragement. Go from here, honorable sir, to a good destination, to companionship with human beings. On becoming a human being, acquire a conviction unsurpassed in true Dhamma. That conviction of yours is true Dhamma, well taught, should be settled, rooted, established, undestroyed as long as you live. Having abandoned bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct, and whatever else is flawed, having done with the body what's skillful, and much that is skillful with speech, having done what's skillful with the heart without limit, with no acquisitions, then, having made much of the merit that's a ground for spontaneously arising, in brackets, in heaven, through giving, establish other mortals in true Dhamma and the holy life. With this sympathy, the Devas, when they know a Deva is passing away, encourage him, come back, Deva, again and again. And that comes from ITI 83. A great place to leave today, I think. This is probably what would be the hardest thing for someone who came up in the West, maybe, and came up in a Judeo-Christian framework. This is where all they're taking what they like and leaving the rest just can't work here. Because the Buddha was just really, really clear. That heaven that you're looking for, that heaven that you're going to go to when you die, you're looking at it. Human birth is the highest realm. In Buddhism, we're not really humanists. It's more of like we're just lucky enough to have been born into human form with this incredible mind, this ability to think critically, this consciousness. I wasn't born as a slug or a snail, not to, again, I mean no disrespect to slugs or snails. But this is it. This is heaven. Folks. Humans. And I think that certainly in Western Buddhism, this is really left out. It is and it isn't, it's, I don't know if that's just to placate, a Judeo-Christian audience, the way that Buddha, was teaching to his audience. But I think it does Buddhism a great disservice if you leave this out because of the ramifications of what it means, because it puts a lot of responsibility back on the individual. That even if you've had a terrible life, maybe you've experienced directly racism, sexism, war, rape, human trafficking, torture, violence, the worst, all of it, because all of it exists, right? But we were born into this human life so that we could practice. Because my cat doesn't have enough consciousness to make that choice. And so we just say, please keep coming back. Please keep coming back. Listen to the end of that. With this sympathy, the Devas, when they know a Deva is passing away, encourage him, come back, Deva, again and again. Come back. This is it. Come back in human form, right? It's the high. It's the. That's where it's at, right here. So I think I'm going to stop right here, and we'll pick up the bottom of page 179 next time, and continue working our way through Chapter 3 and right view. And we still have quite a ways to go, but little by little, week by week, I'll get there. Thank you for listening, and take good care of yourself. Practice. Be well.